The Deathworld girl stayed calm until the alien bully crossed the line. The first time Veth Oren tried to scare me, I was eating breakfast. He walked past my table in the common hall, looked down at the tray in front of me, and curled the upper ridge of his face into what I had learned was the Drakari version of disgust. He was 3 heads taller than me, built like a wall with opinions, and his species had been flying between stars for 600 years before Earth figured out fire was useful indoors. He said, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, that the nutrition paste humans consumed looked like something scraped off a reactor seal. His group laughed. A few other students looked over. I took another spoonful and told him it tasted better than it looked, which was true, and went back to my notes. He stood there for a moment. I think he expected something. I did not give it to him. That was month 1. My name is Mira Vasquez. I am 19 years old. I come from a city in the Colombian highlands where the altitude alone has killed tourists, where the rainy season brings landslides, where my grandmother kept a machete by the back door not for criminals but for snakes, and where I once helped my uncle pull a neighbor out of a collapsed wall with nothing but rope and stubbornness for 40 minutes until the real help arrived. I did not grow up soft. I grew up knowing that most things that wanted to hurt you gave some kind of warning first, and that the smart move was almost always to stay quiet, assess the situation, and decide carefully before doing anything at all. Kareth Station Academy sits in orbit around a brown dwarf star in what the galactic community calls neutral educational space. It is the most prestigious multi-species institution in this region, and Earth had been a provisional member of the Galactic Alliance for just under 4 years when I was offered a seat in their exchange program. I was one of 12 humans on the station. I was the only one in my cohort of 60 students. Most of them had never met a human before. A surprising number of them were afraid of me before I opened my mouth, and then confused about it afterward, because I was not what they expected. I was not large by human standards. I did not make loud noises or move erratically. I smiled often. I asked careful questions. I learned fast. What unsettled them, I came to understand, was not what I did, it was what I did not do. Syrinx was the first friend I made. They were Velhari, which meant long and serpentine and deeply clever, with iridescent scales and a habit of coiling around the back of chairs during lectures, because Velhari spines preferred curves to straight lines. They were a linguistic specialist with a gift for cultural translation and a deep, almost painful sensitivity to tone. They could hear the difference between a friendly silence and an unfriendly one from across a room. Andrew came second, pethily, 4 arms, barrel-chested, with a voice like gravel sliding down a hill. He was an engineering student, and the most genuinely kind individual I had met since leaving Earth. He worried constantly about my diet and had once spent 40 minutes researching whether human digestive systems could handle the protein compounds in pathali cooking, which was both touching and unnecessary, because I had already eaten half of it by the time he found his answer. These 2 people were my people on Kareth Station, my survival team. Back home, I had learned early that in any dangerous environment, the people around you are not just companions. They are the reason you make good decisions. Vetheran understood social hierarchy the way some organisms understand predation, instinctively, efficiently, without apparent guilt. He was a 3rd-year Drakari student whose family had diplomatic connections and whose species had, for several centuries, occupied a position near the top of galactic academic prestige. He was brilliant in the way that certain people are brilliant and know it and use it as a tool of control. He managed the social order of our cohort through small pressures applied at exactly the right points. He decided who had easy access to the advanced lab equipment. He decided whose study group was worth joining. He decided with the casual authority of someone who had never needed to question it, who mattered. In month 2, he began a quiet campaign to establish that humans did not. It started with remarks in class, small ones, accurate enough to be hard to argue with directly, framed to land like insults. Earth's late arrival to galactic society. Humanity's short recorded history. The notable lack of any human contribution to existing interstellar infrastructure. He delivered these observations pleasantly, in the same tone he might use to note the weather, and watched to see how I would respond. I responded by citing 3 peer-reviewed xenosociological papers that complicated his framing, asking a follow-up question that shifted the conversation forward, and moving on. He found this interesting. I could see him recalibrating, In month 3, the rumor started that humans had no real pain response, that my calm was not composure but absence, that there was simply less going on inside me than inside a normal species, and that this explained my failure to react the way anyone expected. The rumor spread quickly. Students began looking at me not with the wariness of someone who has encountered an unknown species, but with the comfortable distance of someone who has decided the unknown is probably just empty. I told Cyrix about it one evening, sitting in the low-light corridor they preferred, my back against the curved wall, their tail coiled loosely near my feet. They asked why I did not correct it publicly. I said, because correcting it publicly would require showing them something they had not seen yet, and I was not ready to spend that yet. Cyrix was quiet for a moment. Then they said that was either very wise or very strange, and they could not decide which. I said it was probably both. What I did not explain, because it was difficult to put into words that translated cleanly, was that I had learned growing up that reacting to every threat is how you get worn down. Every animal that ever hunted in my part of the world knew the difference between a threat worth chasing and one worth watching. You save your energy, you stay quiet, you assess. Is this dangerous? Is this survivable? Is engaging worth the cost? Veth was unpleasant and powerful within a specific social context, but he was not dangerous to me. He was loud, and loud things, in my experience, were loud because they wanted a reaction. I did not give him one. Month 4 brought the coolant incident in the engineering bay. A line cracked during Andrew's lab session. The chemical involved was corrosive to Pathali's skin at direct contact, mildly irritating to most others, and the emergency protocols required clearing the bay and waiting for a maintenance team with proper equipment. Bundru's project had a presentation deadline in 6 hours. I went in, wrapped my jacket around my hands and forearms, located the cracked segment by following the hiss, held the pressure point with both hands while Andrew sealed the line from the control panel. The process took 11 minutes. My hands came out with a chemical rash across both palms that itched for 2 days. I treated it with something from my kit. I did not mention it to anyone. Several students had watched through the bay window. None of them said anything to me directly, but something changed in the way they moved around me in the hallways. A small, instinctive widening, like a tide pulling back from a shoreline it had not known to avoid before. Veth noticed the change and did not like it. In month 6, he shifted targets. It was gradual at first, a comment about Velhari academic contributions in a joint seminar, a remark about Cyrix's choice of research focus, delivered with the kind of gentle curiosity that carried a blade under it. He knew exactly what he was doing. Cyrix was socially fragile, in ways I was not, more sensitive to tone, less equipped to deflect, and visibly shaken in ways that Veth could point to as confirmation of his own superiority. I noticed Cyrix beginning to eat alone, skipping the shared study sessions, arriving late to lectures and leaving early. Their scales, which shifted slightly in color with emotional state, stayed in the dull gray-green of sustained stress for days at a time. I asked them about it once. They told me they were fine. The way they coiled tighter when they said it told me everything else. I watched Veth. I kept watching. I added information. I stayed calm. It was a choice. I want to be clear about that. I was choosing it every single day, and every single day the calculation came back the same way. Not yet, not yet, not yet. Andrew told me in month 7, very quietly, over Pathali tea that I drank without complaint, even though it tasted like warm copper, that Veth had revoked his access to the advanced materials fabricator. The deadline for Andrew's capstone project was in 6 weeks. Without that fabricator, the project failed. Bondrew had not reported it. He was afraid of being seen as difficult, afraid of losing his position, afraid that as a Pathali from a small colony world, he did not have enough standing to make the kind of noise that would require anyone to listen. I told him I would talk to Veth. I found Veth alone in the upper study corridor and spoke to him directly, calmly. I explained the situation with Andrew's access. I explained what I wanted. I kept my voice level and my posture neutral, and I gave him every possible opportunity to decide this matter quietly, like an adult. He laughed. He told me Earth had provisional status and that provisional members did not issue instructions to established ones. He said something in Drakari that I did not know the words to but understood completely from the sound of it. I looked at him for a moment. Then I said, "All right," and left. That night I sat in the observation bay and watched the brown dwarf glow below and ran the calculation again. Was he dangerous? Within his social context, yes. And increasingly so. Was it survivable? Yes. Was engaging worth the cost? I had been sitting with that question for 7 months. The answer changed on a Tuesday in month 8, when Cyrix did not show up for our afternoon meeting point. I waited 12 minutes, which is not something I do, and then I went looking. I found Cyrix in the low-light environmental corridor, coiled entirely into themselves on the floor, trembling in a continuous fine vibration that I had never seen before, and that looked, to my very human and very certain gut, like an animal that had been cornered. Veth was not there. He had been there. The residual displacement of air in the corridor, the geometry of where Cyrix was positioned, and the particular direction their face was turned, told me which exit he had used. He had not touched them. He did not need to. He had used the corridor, and his size, and his voice, and whatever words he had chosen, and he had left Cyrix on the floor like a problem he had finished solving. I sat down next to Cyrix on the floor. I did not say anything for a while. I got the water thermos from my bag, the one calibrated to Velhari chemistry, and I put it in front of them. I waited. After a time, Cyrix uncoiled slightly and looked at me. They asked if I was angry. I told them I was not angry. I was working. My voice was completely level when I said it. That part was not a choice. I found Veth in the main common area because Veth was always in the main common area when he wanted an audience. And he always wanted an audience. His usual group was around him. Several other students were nearby. The room was mid-conversation, mid-meal, mid-afternoon. I walked in and crossed to where he was sitting and stood there until he acknowledged me, which took slightly longer than it should have because he was performing indifference for his group. When he looked up, I began speaking. I told him about Cyrix. I told him what I had found in that corridor and what I understood it to mean. I told him what Cyrix was to me and what Andrew was to me, and I explained this in plain language because I wanted there to be no confusion. I said that where I come from, the people you share difficult space with are not just friends. They are the reason you survive, and the things that threaten them are therefore in a different category from the things that are merely unpleasant. I said this without raising my voice. I said this the way I would have described a problem in a lab report. Clear, precise, present tense. The room had gone very quiet by the second sentence. I noticed this but did not address it. I told him what I wanted. Cyrix receives a direct and sincere apology, delivered personally, not through a mediator. Andrew's access to the fabricator is fully restored before end of day. And if Veth finds some other way to manage his social needs that does not involve the people in my specific circle. Veth let me finish. Then he tilted his head in the way Drakari do when they are deciding whether to be amused or contemptuous, and he told me that I could not make him do anything. I looked at him. I held that look for a few seconds and let the silence do its work. Then I said, quietly, that I understood his position. I said that I had, in fact, understood his position since month 1. I said that he had spent the better part of a year building a social structure based on making people afraid of him, and that it had worked on most people, and that I thought he had found my own lack of reaction either confusing or insulting. I said that I wanted to clarify something about that. I told him that the reason I had not reacted was not because I lacked the capacity for it. It was not because I was empty, or slow, or unaware of what he was doing. It was because I had learned, on a planet that has been actively trying to kill the things that live on it for 4 billion years, that reacting to everything is how you lose. You wait, you watch, you choose the moment carefully. I said, still completely level, that where I came from, the predators that hunted my ancestors were faster than him, quieter than him, far less predictable, and they came at night. They came from below. They came from inside the walls of things that looked safe, and the people I descended from survived them anyway, not by being stronger, by being patient, by being very, very sure before they moved. I looked at him, and I let him understand that I had been patient, that I had been very sure, that I was, right now, in this moment, no longer in the phase of deciding. I smiled at him. The same smile I used for everything on Kareth Station. Easy, warm, unalarmed. I told him I was asking nicely. The room did not make any sound. Veth was still, the kind of still that happens not because someone is relaxed, but because their body has received information that requires a moment to process. His group, who had spent 7 months learning to mirror his reactions, found nothing to mirror. I saw him make the calculation. I recognized it because I had been making my own version of it for months. He was asking himself what he actually knew about what a human being does when it stops making the choice to hold back. He did not have a good answer. He had rumors. He had a girl who walked into a burning training sim and came out bored. He had a girl who held a corrosive pipe with her bare hands and treated the damage privately. He had a girl who had absorbed 7 months of direct social pressure without once giving him the emotional confirmation he needed. He did not know what came after that, and he was, I could see, not entirely certain he wanted to find out. He told me it was a pragmatic outcome. I told him I appreciated that. Cyrix got their apology 2 hours later. It was imperfect. It was stiff and short, and Veth clearly found the process uncomfortable. Sidscrix did not know how to receive it, because no one in their experience had ever offered one. We sat together afterward in the low-light corridor, and Sidscrix said they did not know what to do with it. I said that was fine. They would learn, so would he. Andrew's fabricator access was restored before dinner. When he found out, he went very still for a moment in the way Pathali do when they are processing something that has moved them, all 4 arms drawing slightly inward. Then he asked me what had happened. I said I had a conversation. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, very seriously, with full sincerity in every syllable, that I was the most alarming individual he had ever encountered in his life, and that he meant that as the highest possible compliment his culture could produce. I told him I was going to put that on my academic record. He asked, and I could tell the curiosity was genuine underneath the discomfort, how humans were taught to produce that kind of response, whether it was something trained into us deliberately. I told him nobody had sat me down and explained how to be calm in situations that wanted to make me panic. It was not a structured lesson. It was something that accumulated, year after year, living in a place where panic was expensive and you could not spend it freely, where the landscape itself tested you seasonally, where the things that could kill you were sometimes in the water, and sometimes in the soil, and sometimes in the air at altitude, and where reacting badly to the first sign of danger simply increased the total danger. You learned to slow down internally while your body kept moving. You learned to let the fear exist without letting it lead. Andrew thought about this carefully. Then he told me that Pethali children were taught 7 formal breathing techniques for threat regulation, a practice that had been part of their educational tradition for over 200 years. He had been practicing them since he was 4 years old. He said they worked, mostly. They brought him back from panic reliably. But he had never, in all his years of practice, managed to simply not arrive at the panic in the first place. He said watching me in that common room had been like watching someone walk around a hole that everyone else fell into before they noticed it was there. I considered that for a moment. Then I said that maybe the difference was exactly that the techniques were designed for recovery. And what I had was not a technique, it was a reflex shaped by a world that had not given me the option of recovery being enough. You needed to not fall in. Andrew nodded slowly with all 4 arms, which I had learned was his version of a deep and sincere acknowledgement. He said he hoped Earth kept sending people to Kareth Station. I told him I hoped they sent all kinds of people, the loud ones and the quiet ones and every variation in between, that the galaxy seemed like it could use more of all of them. He said that was possibly the most diplomatic thing I had said in 8 months. I told him I had my moments. That night the 3 of us sat in the observation bay. The brown dwarf turned slowly below us, reddish and vast and patient. Sorix's scales had shifted back towards silver and blue. Andrew had brought Pathali tea, and also, because he had decided to try, a container of something he had found in the human nutrition catalog that he thought I might like. It tasted like cardboard shaped into a circle. I ate all of it. Cicerex asked me, after a while, if I had ever actually been scared, on the station, of any of it. I thought about that honestly. I told them once, one time. They asked when. I said, when Veth was in that corridor with you, and I was not there. Cyrix went quiet for a long time, long enough that the brown dwarf completed a visible fraction of its slow rotation below us. Then they said, very gently, that this was the most human thing I had ever said. I looked at the star below and thought about that. I told them probably. Outside the observation window, the stars were cold and old and enormous. They had been burning since long before Earth figured out what to do with all the things that wanted to kill the creatures living on it. Long before those creatures learned patience. Long before they climbed off their difficult little planet and into the wider dark, carrying all that patient, quiet, carefully maintained stillness with them. I finished my cardboard circle. Andrew offered me another one. I said yes.